It's now 10 a.m. Geneva time. Thank you for being with us on time. I'm particularly addressing to the attendees who have joined us online. We are just waiting for one more panelist to join, and then we will start. So we are now launching this event. Excellencies, dear colleagues, good morning to who is with us at the International Environment House, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who is with us on WebEx or is now watching the recording of this event. The Geneva Environment Network has the pleasure to welcome you today for a briefing co-organized with the Secretariat of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions in preparation of their upcoming meetings of the Conference of the Parties, which will take place in Geneva in May. Before proceeding, let me remind you that the documents presented, the summary, as well as the video of the event will be made available on the webpage of this event. The link is being shared in the chat or for who is online, or is available on the screen for who is with us here in the room. Throughout the event, those who are online can raise their questions by using the Q&A box. We have a dedicated session to answer these after the presentations. Finally, let me also add that the transcription is available at the bottom left of your screen for who is online with us. We'll now proceed with the welcome and introductory remarks. Rolf Payet, the Executive Secretary of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Convention, will deliver those remarks, and he will also be sharing this session. Rolf, over to you.
Thank you very much, Diana, and an excellent good morning to you all, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, good morning to both who are here physically present with us and also colleagues who are joining us online. On behalf of the Secretariat of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions, I take the opportunity to thank the Geneva Environment Network for their support in organizing today's event. Before we start with the presentations, I would like to highlight the intense intersessional work that has paved the way towards successful meetings leading up to the 2023 COPs. In fact, in just 3 months since our last briefing in December 2022, the BRS Secretariat has organized and facilitated at least 8 meetings to make progress on various topics such as PCB elimination, development of technical guidelines on plastics and e-waste, prevention of illegal traffic of waste, review of the annexes of the Basel Convention, among other trainings and consultations, including our very famous chairs training. I'd also like to highlight that the BRS Secretariat has also contributed to develop an international, to contribute to the global governance on hazardous chemicals and wastes by actively engaging in the sessions of the INC on developing an international treaty on the legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, as well as the resume session of the OWG of the Science Policy Panel, and the resume session, which was held last week, of the 4th meeting of the intersessional process considering the strategic approach and sound management of chemicals and waste beyond 2020. Before concluding my remarks, I would like to thank the governments of Germany and Switzerland for funding the regional preparatory meetings of the BRS COPs, which will be taking place during this month, and the dates will be provided soon. We also have financial contributions from the governments of China, Denmark, Japan, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, and the Netherlands for funding the participants' travel and of course, the organizing of the 2023 BRS COPs. We also have a few pledges, and I would like to reiterate again our call, especially to donors, to continue making pledges for the upcoming COPs as we need more resources. With these few words, I would like to thank you, and I give the floor now to my colleagues to initiate the presentations. So thank you so much. Now it gives me the pleasure to, let me just get my program ready, to invite Marilyn, who will make the first presentation on the highlights of the upcoming COPs. Marianne, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rolf. Good morning, everyone. I'm Marilyn Vaux, a program officer in the governance branch of the BRS Secretariat. And it's my pleasure to see you all this morning and to deliver to you an update on preparations for the upcoming meetings of the COPs. So my first slide provides some highlights about the meetings. So here we are looking at the 16th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Basel Convention, as well as the 11 meetings of the Conferences of the Parties to the Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions. As you know, those are three meetings of the Conferences of the Parties that are held back to back, and they will be held from the 1st to the 12th of May here in Geneva at the Geneva International Conference Center. The meetings will be preceded by preparatory meetings on the Sunday, 30th of April. So those preparatory meetings will be composed of regional group meetings as well as a joint bureau meeting. And the schedule of the preparatory meetings will be announced on the website shortly. The meetings will be organized under the theme Accelerating Actions, Targets for Sound Management of Chemicals and Wastes. The meetings will be purely face-to-face. There is no provision for online participation at the meetings. There was no request from the COPs, nor any provisions in the budget for online participation. There would not also be any high-level segment at the upcoming meetings. The meetings will be chaired by the three COP presidents. For the Basel Convention, you have Mr. Reggie Ernoos from the Netherlands. For the Rotterdam Convention COP, you have Anna Beregiani from Georgia. And for the Stockholm COP, it is Kima Gardiner from Trinidad and Tobago. In the margins of the COPs, there will also be a PCB fair during 3 days from the 3rd to the 5th of May, during which events will highlight efforts to accelerate the reach of the targets under the Stockholm Convention 2025-2028 regarding the elimination of PCBs. There will also be side events being organized during lunchtime and evening sessions of the COPs. So a number of side events will be organized for parties as well as observers to present their work and share experiences and network for the implementation of the conventions. On the slide, you also have the URL to the meeting webpage, where you can find additional information about the meetings, as well as all the COP documents that are now going to be released, and also for the meeting. Now, I would like to turn to registration for the meetings. So representative of parties were invited to register, as well as for those that need financial assistance, also to indicate need for financial assistance by the 20th of January. So we've received a large number of registrations for the meeting. Admitted observers to meetings of the conferences of the parties are invited to register by the 24th of March. For bodies or agencies that have not been previously admitted to meetings of the conferences of the parties as admitted observers, they would need to follow a procedure for admission of observer before being registered to the meetings. On the slide, you can also find timings for the on-site registration. So on-site registration will start from the Sunday, 30th of April, from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. On the Monday, there is also a special timing for on-site registration from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Other days of the meetings, on-site registration will be open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Another important point are credentials for parties representatives. As you know, credentials are issued by head of state, head of governments, or Minister of Foreign Affairs. And submissions of credentials to the Secretariat, if possible, need to be done 24 hours after the opening of the meetings, which is on Tuesday, 2nd of May, by 10 a.m. in the morning. So submission of credentials are welcomed by this deadline. The bureaus have agreed on an approach for the preparations of their reports on credentials, and they have agreed to accept original credentials in good order, as well as copies of credentials in good orders, with the understanding that the original credentials would be submitted as soon as possible. So this is the approach that has been agreed by the three bureaus for their preparations of their reports on credentials. Also, to facilitate the review of credentials, the Secretariat invites parties to submit electronic copies of their credentials by the 7th of April, and that the originals can be submitted at the meeting venue. Now, on the next two slides, we will provide you with a short overview of the tentative schedule of work that have been agreed by the three bureaus at their joint meeting on the 18th of January. So as you can see, the schedule provides indeed the working hours of the plenary from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. and the afternoon it is from 3 to 6 p.m. They provide also the agenda items that will be discussed during morning sessions and afternoon sessions. As you can see, it is a schedule for 2 weeks. So we have week 1, we have week 2. It follows more or less a previous organization of work of previous COPs. In the way that you have at the beginning of the 2 weeks joint sessions that are common to the 3 conferences of the parties. Then it is followed by Stockholm Convention specific sessions, as you can see in the first week, then Basel Convention specific sessions toward the second week and beginning of the second, towards the end of the first week and then beginning of the second week, and then followed and to conclude with the Rotterdam Convention specific session in the second week. What is to be noted this time around for the upcoming meetings, perhaps are the early sessions. As it was done in the past, the bureaus identified the need to have certain convention-specific sessions early in the 2 weeks of meetings. And those are the Basel early session on Monday, the 1st of May, as you can see on the first day of the meetings, as well as a Stockholm Convention specific session. So those are our early sessions to take up items on the agendas that will require further discussion during the 2 weeks of meetings. To be also noted is the Rotterdam Convention specific session. So here we are on the afternoon of the 3rd of May. So the bureaus have agreed to have a Rotterdam early session that afternoon to take up the item on enhancing the effectiveness of the Rotterdam Convention. In particular, to take up the sub-item on the amendment proposal to amend Articles 7, 10, 11 and 22 of the Convention, as well as to add a new Annex 8. So the Rotterdam COP will then be expected to take up this item here, discuss it. And if a contact group is to be established on the issue of the amendment proposal, the contact group would not meet before the Sunday, 7th of May. That was also a point that was discussed by the bureaus, that if a contact group would need to be established on the amendment proposals under the Rotterdam Convention, the contact group wouldn't meet before the next week, the Sunday, 7th of May. So it is quite an important point to note for the planning of travels of representatives. So, yes, and on that slide, you have the second week. So as you see, this is more traditional to previous meetings of the COPs with Basel sessions followed by Rotterdam. And towards the end of the 2 weeks, you will also have joint sessions to adopt joint decisions. And then the last day, there will be adoption of the respective budgets of the conventions and the joint closure. The three bureaus have also discussed and identified potential groups, contact groups and other groups that could be established during the meetings. So the slides illustrates those potential groups. So as done in the past, it is likely that there will be some joint contact groups being established, in particular on programs of work and budgets, on technical assistance and financial resources and mechanisms, and joint issues. For the Stockholm COP, more specifically, the COP may decide to establish a contact group on listing, as well as on compliance. For the Basel COP, there could also be interest for the COP to establish the three traditional contact groups, the one on technical matters, on strategic matters, and on the compliance and legal matters. And finally, for the Rotterdam COP, the COP may wish also to consider establishing a group on enhancing the effectiveness of the convention, and possibly other two groups on compliance and listing of chemicals. However, the bureaus are still to discuss those possible tentative groups, and will then propose something to the COPs for a decision at the meetings. It is also to be noted that the number of groups meeting at one time would need to be limited, to ensure that all the delegations are able to participate in the discussions in the groups. The upcoming COPs are also going to elect a number of officers and members of subsidiary bodies. The slides presents all the positions that are currently vacant and for which elections would take place at the next meetings. So I won't go into the details. It is for your information and further consultations within your region. Another important thing, however, to be noted on elections is that the bureaus have agreed to take a number of steps to facilitate the decision-making process on the election at the COPs, in particular to facilitate nominations coming forward. So the first step that they took was to ask the Secretariat to send a letter to invite parties to submit candidates for elections by the 1st of March 2023. So that was the first step, to send forward nominations by the 1st of March to the Secretariat. And then the bureaus also have agreed to identify regional election focal points that will assist their regions in agreeing on the candidates to be elected at the COPs. So on the slide, you have the election focal points, the regional election focal points, as agreed to by the three bureaus. So those are the contact points really for any nominations within the regions. It is to be noted also that for elections, as per the financial rules, no representative of parties whose contributions have been in arrears for 2 or more years shall be eligible to become a member of the Basel Bureau or its subsidiary bodies, as well as a member of the Rotterdam and Stockholm Bureau or of a member of their subsidiary bodies. So it's also an important rule to know for parties when putting forward nominations for elections. It is to be noted, however, that those rules do not apply to least developed countries and small island developing states or parties that have agreed to a payment schedule for their arrears. This slide is also very important. It highlights the guidelines for rules of conduct for meeting participants at the COPs to the BRS conventions, as well as meetings of their subsidiary bodies. So those 3 sets of guidelines have been developed to ensure an orderly running of the meetings coming up, so the COP meetings, but also subsidiary meetings, subsidiary body meetings. The first set of guidelines relate to the use of cameras and audio-video recording devices during meetings of the COPs or subsidiary body meetings. The second set relates to the participation of representative of observers. And last but not least, guidelines relate to the prevention and addressing of all forms of harassment at meetings of the BRS conventions. So those are very important guidelines that we wanted to draw attention to in preparing for the meetings of the COPs. In the lead up to the COPs, there will be also regional preparatory meetings being organized in 4 UN regions: Asia Pacific, Africa, Eastern Europe, and GRULAC. So the slides provide you with information about the dates of those meetings, as well as the locations. So regional meetings are aim at assisting parties to consult each other on issues of the agendas of the meetings, and if possible, come up with regional positions as appropriate. So those meetings are coming up very soon. We will have the first one in Asia Pacific next week. And this is my last slide. It just provides you some information about upcoming additional briefings that the Secretariat will be organizing in the run-up to the COPs. So you have the dates. We will, and the URL, we will be conducting online webinars in languages where we will also go into further details of the agendas of the COPs. So that's concludes then my presentation on the update on preparations of meetings of the COPs. Thank you very much, Rolf.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. Just a few points from me before I hand over then for the next presentation. On the issue of arrays, if you're not sure about the status of arrays for your particular country, party, please let us know, and we'll be very happy to provide you with the information. It's better we get it now than to get it during the COPs, because then it makes it easier for nominations, and of course it makes the elections much smoother and better. On the issue of gender, I keep always reminding our member states that we need to also ensure that there is adequate gender representation. So in your discussions on representation, make sure there is gender balance. As you can see, this year we have some gender balance at the president's level and in the bureau, but it's something that we need to keep. I'm sorry. Sorry. Thank you. We need to keep in mind when making nominations. On the issue of rules of conduct, this is a very important area where we've seen an increase in people being harassed during the conferences. I know it's 2 weeks and we're all getting very friendly with each other. Please do respect each other, do respect it during the plenary, but also outside of the plenary. And it's something that I will take action on if there are cases of harassment. So I just wanted to highlight this, and it's very, very important. So they do take time to convey to the delegates attending the meeting to read the guidelines on rules of conduct. And finally, on the regional meetings, and this is especially for observers, please note that the regional meetings for the attendance of observers at the discretion of the organizers of the regional meetings. And many times they have closed meetings, which even the Secretariat is not allowed to participate in. So please do not be offended blame the Secretariat if the regional meetings do not allow you as an observer to participate in their meetings. But that's up to them, because at the end of the day, they have to prepare and agree on their regional positions. That's additional information from me. Now I'll hand over to David Ogden, who will proceed with the next presentation.
Thank you, Rolf. And just to start with, to say that I'm just going to kind of gloss over some of these issues. It's not meant to be a full briefing. That would take, well, the 3 days of a regional preparatory meeting to do. So we won't try to do, but to give you an idea of sort of the products that the COP will be considering and the sort of decisions it may need to take. And so I'm just going to start from that. I would also mention that almost all of the documents are now available on our websites. There are many, many pages. We try to get things out 6 weeks to 3 months before the meeting, depending on the type of document. And so hopefully that'll give you enough time to consult within your capitals on the various issues so that you are prepared for the meetings, as well as the regional preparatory meetings that Marilyn and Rolf have mentioned. Just to quickly run through the issues that are there, I'll start with Basel Convention. There is a strategic framework under the Basel Convention. These are usually 10-year periods where they look at trying to improve the effectiveness of the Basel Convention and then look at how successful they were at doing that under the 10-year period, and then they set up. So we're just finishing one sort of cycle and looking to do another. And at this meeting, there will be probably more of a process-related discussion that would be then considered at the following COP on how to undertake the next strategic framework. The next is on the enhancing the prior informed consent procedure under the Basel Convention. And this too is something where there is been a lot of discussions on how to streamline that process, make it easier for parties to comply with it. Sorry. I need to be closer. Okay. Thank you. Less close? Okay. I thought I was getting a bit of an echo, and I have a bit of a loud voice. But anyway, this is the process by which for the procedure for ensuring that the procedure is followed, but it has been cumbersome, and then trying to find ways to make it more efficient. Again, this will be discussed at the COP, but they'll put in place a process for the following COP to agree on how to do that. And then I will move then to the scientific matters, and the Basel Convention is a very scientific convention, as you'll see. And there are a number of technical guidelines which are voluntary, but they have a lot of input and they're very useful for parties. And a big one that's coming up this time will be a new one on plastic waste and on the environmentally sound management of plastic waste. A whole lot of work has been done over the last 11 months, and this should be ready for negotiation and adoption at the COPs. There's also the ones on POPs waste. Every time there's a chemical added to the Stockholm Convention, and Basel Convention is asked to provide technical guidelines on the management of those waste. Waste lead acid batteries, there's more work on that. Still more work is expected to be required. And then the complementary batteries, which is sort of the other batteries that are, of course, becoming more and more important with all the electric vehicles and the batteries that are required for that. So that's big. E-waste, of course, there were some e-waste amendments made at the previous meeting, and those guidelines will need to be amended to conform to these new requirements under the convention. Then quickly on e-waste notifications, this is trying to also involves a PIC procedure and trying to make it a more electronic process. So it's really related to the PIC procedure. There's other follow-up on the e-waste amendments that I won't get into at this point. And then there is the plastics waste. Now I'm getting over into the partnerships program. We currently have 4 partnership programs underway under the Basel Convention. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but these are all in development of, they have work plans. They've got a lot of work going on. So we'll be looking at the work plans for each of these. In case of the household waste partnership, there will actually be a guidance document to be considered for possible adoption as well. And then I move on to legal governance and enforcement issues. There's a very long-running implementation and compliance committee. You can see there's many issues. They cover from specific submissions to actually more general issues about compliance. And again, you'll be looking at the program of work for that group. On legal clarity, there is work on amendments to annexes 1, 3, and 4. It's not clear how far those issues will get at the next COP, but if there's not a conclusion, then the work will continue through a small intersessional working group. Then quickly on to the Rotterdam Convention. You'll see that there's a newly established compliance mechanism under that, and that group had its first meeting just toward the end of last year. And so again, they'll be looking at the work program for that. And then where the sort of specifics are, 2 new chemicals that are being put forward, recommended by the Chemicals Review Committee, the subsidiary body that deals with these issues. And those are on ibuprofen and turbofos. So those are 2. And then there's 5 chemicals which were recommended previously to the COP for addition to the Annex 3. But even though they have agreed that they have followed the process, the criteria have been met, there has not been consensus to actually add them to Annex 3. So this brings me to enhancing the effectiveness, and we will talk more about this later. Actually, Michelle from Switzerland will be presenting the proposal from Switzerland, Austria, Burkina Faso, Ghana, and Mali to amend the convention and to add a new Annex 8, which would deal with those chemicals for which they were not able to reach consensus. They were recommended by the CRC, but for which they were not able to reach consensus. And this would be another annex which would provide a set of requirements for those parties that wish to be bound to this amendment for actually ensuring that the prior informed consent would happen for that group of countries. And then and so I'm just saying this will be dealt with much later in the briefing. And then a proposal by African countries to amend Annex 16, which deals with the financial resources of the convention. Stockholm, continued work on evaluating the continued need for DDT. And then for PCBs, there is a assessment of the progress made toward the elimination of PCBs. And just a reminder that there'll be a strategy to actually meet the 2025 and 2028 goals. I actually call them, they're actually requirements under the convention, so that the use is stopped by 2025 and then the elimination by 2028, which is really a huge endeavor. And then further work on PFAS, salts, and other compounds. Those are more dealing with the continued need for specific exemptions for those chemicals. And then again, we're getting to the sort of the real meat of it. There's been 3 chemicals that have been recommended by the POPs Review Committee, which is a subsidiary body under Stockholm: methoxychlor, Declorm Plus, and UV328, which the last one is actually used in plastics. So that's also an interesting little sidebar on that. Those will come before the COP for consideration for actually amending Annex A to the convention to add those chemicals. Compliance, there still is no compliance mechanism under the Stockholm Convention, and there's going to be a new effort to try to see if that can be accomplished at this COP. This revised guidance on national implementation plans, and we'll be doing some updating of the reporting system. Sorry to run through these so quickly. They are here in the presentation you'll have, so you'll see them afterwards. Under technical assistance, and these are joint issues common to at least 2 and often all 3 of the conventions. The one is on the review of the regional centers. They're under Stockholm. The COP actually will be asked to review and endorse the centers. And for the Basel Convention, it's a review, but there's a different sort of legal arrangement for those. So it's more taking note of those evaluations. Under Rotterdam, there are no regional centers, but oftentimes they'll use the Basel or Stockholm centers. And there are also FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, has regional and sub-regional entities that also can be helpful. International cooperation with the Minamata Convention on mercury, and sort of we're actually looking at a list of possible joint activities that can be undertaken. There's a lot of cooperation between the 2, and there's even sort of mirroring decisions that sort of link the programmatic as well as some of the more supportive activities. And we do tend to help with their meetings, and they help with ours, and this is all dealt with. And so you'll see there's a lot of good cooperation between the 2 secretariats. And then there's a broader decision on international cooperation that deals with, of course, the INC on plastics, the SSP process dealing with chemicals, and other areas. And it's an opportunity for the COPs to provide some guidance and even a sort of a steer on how and where to enhance cooperation with other international groups. And then the next to last thing I have is on the on synergies on illegal traffic. Under Basel, there is an enforced mechanism that I was listed before that deals with how enhancing cooperation to better enforce or prevent illegal traffic, and it's actually looking more at Rotterdam and Stockholm, and can they sort of look at what's been done under Basel or in other areas and seeing how they could enhance their ability to prevent or combat illegal traffic. And then the last two are really for Gunda, so I will not be going into those at this time. We'll really leave those on the program of work and budgets, and then on the MOUs with UNEP, and in the case of Rotterdam Convention, also with FAO. So sorry to run through all that, but the documents are on the webpage, and please let us know if you have any more specific questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I will now pass on to Gunde Gatrum Kalni, who is the Chief of Funds Management Administration and Human Resources branch in the BRS Secretariat, and she will present on budget and MOU and other issues. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to first start that our budget documents have been developed jointly for the three conventions and include two funding scenarios: Executive Secretary scenario not exceeding a 5% increase above the 22-23 approved budget, and the zero nominal growth scenario, maintaining the operational budget at the 22-23 level in nominal terms. There are three documents I would like to bring to your attention. The first document presents the combined proposal, while the second presents operational budgets for the two scenarios, and the third provides further details on the individual activities. While all documents are available in English, the first document, the combined proposal, which is a working document, is available in the 6 official languages of the United Nations. And now let's take a look at the comparison of the two scenarios for 24-25 against the approved operational budget of 22-23, separately for core and voluntary funds. Please note that essential activities are funded from the general trust funds, meaning core funds, while all other activities will continue to be funded from the voluntary funds, and implementation will be subject to the availability of resources. You can see that the approved 22-23 operational budget is represented with the dark blue bars, Executive Secretary scenario by medium blue bars, and the zero nominal growth scenario by light blue bars. For 24-25, you can see that the zero nominal growth scenario remains at approximately the same level, slightly lower, as the approved operational budget for 22-23, roughly 31.1 million, while the Executive Secretary's scenario does not exceed the 5% when compared with the approved 22-23 budget, and present an approximately 1.5 million increase over the approved operational budget for 22-23. And now let's take a look how you can find all those documents. So you would have to visit BRS homepage, then select the convention you are interested in, followed by a meeting, and either working document or information documents tab. You will then be able to download the items that you are interested either as a Word document or as a PDF file. And please note that working documents are available in all 6 languages, while information documents are available only in English. And now let's take a look at the implementation of the memorandums of understanding between UNEP, FAO, and the conferences of the parties. There are several meeting documents I would like to bring to your attention, there are 3 implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding documents. So those are currently on your screen, and those you will find at the Meeting Documents tab if you go on a website to look at them. We also have information documents, and those include the report of the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme to the respective conferences of the parties, a report of the Food and Agriculture Organization, which refers to the Rotterdam Convention, as well as the letters of the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme proposing amendments to the memorandums of understanding between UNEP and the Conference of the Parties, to the 3 conferences of the parties. This is a joint document, and you can also find it on the website. And now let's take a look at the background of the situation regarding the MOUs. During the last COPs, identical decisions were taken at the meetings during 6 to 17 June, requesting the Executive Director of UNEP to comply with the MOUs between the UNEP regarding service costs to be covered by UNEP pursuant to the annex to each MOU. Following COPs, a memo was sent by the BRS Executive Secretary to the Executive Director of UNEP, dated 28 July 2022, transmitting the request by the conferences of the parties to the Executive Director of UNEP to comply with the 3 MOUs. This was followed by Executive Director of UNEP initiating a review of the Memorandums of Understanding for the purpose of clarifying the central administrative services provided in support to the 3 conventions against the 33% share of the program support costs income attributable to all 3 trust funds of the convention. As was communicated by the Secretariat to all parties in a letter dated 20 December 2022, the Executive Director of UNEP has, as an outcome of this review, proposed amendments to the MOUs. The letters from the Executive Director and annexes reflecting the proposed revisions to each of the 3 memorandums of understanding in track changes are set out in the document on the screen, which is the last document. You can see the INF 53, INF 39, INF 57. So the major areas of clarification that are needed are services provided by UNOG on behalf of UNEP to the BRS secretariats, and those include medical and counseling services for the BRS staff, services related to host country diplomatic services, mail and diplomatic pouch services, and the biggest category of them all is the security and safety. Regarding implications of these amendments to the budget, first, I would like to mention that the proposed amendments will clarify which services provided to the BRS Secretariat should be covered by the UNEP's share of the PSC costs. The proposed amendments will not result in less services provided to the BRS Secretariat. In principle, approving the amendment will not result in additional costs to the parties, since these costs were already being absorbed by the BRS Secretariat prior to 2022 as part of the core budget, except for the 22-23 budget when these costs were excluded. It should be noted that some of the cost categories, especially security, have continued to increase over the years. I would also like to mention that these services have been included in both budget scenarios for 24-25, meaning the Executive Secretary scenario and the zero nominal growth scenario. And now let's take a look at proposed actions by the parties. Proposed amendments to the 3 MOUs may be reviewed with a view of amending them during the next meeting of the conferences of the parties within the budget contact group. The review may be followed by adapting memorandums of understanding, in particular the annex, setting out the revised central administrative services provided by UNEP in support of the 3 conventions. Decisions may also be made by the parties authorizing the Executive Secretary on an exceptional basis to draw from the available surplus of the three conventions' general trust funds to cover the funding gap for the United Nations Office at Geneva services provided to the Secretariat for the 22-23 biennium, which were not included in the approved budget. It is estimated that the amount needed will be 298,000, covering 7 quarters of the previous biennium, since the first quarter was already prepared. Thank you very much for your attention.
We'll now move to our last presentation for this part of the session. And it is my pleasure to invite Mrs. Kathleen Crevale, Deputy Director of the Corporate Services Division, who's joining us online from Nairobi. Kathleen, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rolf. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, great.
Yes.
So my colleague Gundega has presented an adequate representation of the situation with the amendment to the MOUs between UNEP and each of the conventions, Basel, Stockholm, and Rotterdam. From the UNEP perspective, I would like to reiterate a few points. Indeed, the current MOUs were signed in May 2019, and while I'm not privy to the circumstances leading up to the finalization of the MOUs, which are unique to BRS, I can confirm the underlying principles of the operation of PSC income at UNEP. When the parties to BRS made the decision in June 2022 to disallow certain charges under the core budgets, I, along with the legal teams of UNEP and BRS, reviewed the current MOUs and proposed amendments to bring them in line with standards being adhered to by UNEP divisions, offices, and conventions. Next slide, please. In general, PSC budgets is meant to cover administrative overhead costs, which can be split into two categories. The first is core or centrally managed costs. This includes financial, HR, procurement, and audit services, which result from the fact that BRS is a convention under the umbrella of UNEP, and UNEP is part of the UN Secretariat. These services are administered by offices away from headquarters of the UN Secretariat. For example, UNON in Nairobi, UNOG in Geneva, and SCAP in Bangkok. These costs are covered by the 33% of the PSC that is allocated to UNEP. 2. Common services costs, including rent, utilities, security, pouch, host country services, and joint medical services, which are as a result of where the office is located and how much service it consumes. For example, in Geneva, UNOG bills each agency that it provides services to, UNEP being one of them, one of the many agencies located in Geneva. And then we, in turn, allocate those costs to our offices in Geneva, including BRS, CITES, Minamata, and UNEP regional office, based on usage. In the case of rent and utilities, it is based on floor space occupied. For security costs, it is based on head count of staff, and the mail, pouch, host country, and JMS and medical services are based on actual use. The same procedure is followed in Nairobi and Bangkok. These costs can be covered by the 67% of the PSC share allocated to the offices, or by the operational budgets on the operational costs under the core budgets. As Gundega mentioned, prior to 2022, BRS paid these costs. Likewise, All other conventions and UNEP offices pay these costs. The proposed amendments to the MOUs are meant to clarify the costs that UNEP and BRS are responsible for and bring them in line with practices of all UNEP offices. On the BRS side, since 2015, income generated for BRS PSC budget has been on a decreasing trend due to low implementation rates. Yet, costs associated with this budget have been increasing, and this is mainly due to the administrative staff costs being charged to this budget. This resulted in a deficit which stands at 1.1 million as of the 31st of December 2022, despite the annual 67% allocation of approximately 1.5 million. There is need to resolve this deficit and diversify costs of a long-term nature from this budget. Next slide, please. The current UNEP PSC policy was issued in May 27 and governs all of UNEP and its conventions. The underlying principle is the allocation of 33% to UNEP and 67% to its offices. We at UNEP have embarked on an analysis of the PSC, which would lead to an update of the policy. However, in 2022, two key members of the team working on this effort departed, and so unfortunately, the work is not completed. The timeline for completion of the work is early 2024. We do not envision significant change to the policy. However, as mentioned previously, the immediate need is for the Secretariat to correct the current deficit and perform income projections to this budget over the next few years and match the cost accordingly. The finance and MEA units in my division stand ready to assist with this work. Thank you, and over back to you, Rolf.
So this is the time for the Q&A on all the presentations. Once we finish this set of presentations, then I'll hand over to for the presentation by Switzerland on the Annex 8, and that will be a specific discussion on this. So right now, I just want to make sure that we can, hear your questions on the organization of the COPs, on the content of the organization of work that we have, and also on the budget issues. So the line is open for questions. Thank you, and you can also put them in the chat if we're not getting you clearly. Thank you very much. Yes, Ilya from the Russian Federation, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Payet. My question will be connected with the contact groups and what we are looking at taking up during them. When we are speaking about RC compliance, am I right to understand that what we are about and what the parties are about to discuss is the program of work of the Rotterdam Compliance Committee? And maybe someone can open up a little bit at what we are looking at exactly. Thank you.
Thank you, David. You can take this. Oh, Marina.
Yeah, thank you. There was, as I mentioned, the first meeting, and the primary purpose would be to look at the program of work for the, I don't know, there may be a few other issues, but I think that is the main one. That document is on the web, and I can also have a quick look and talk to you immediately afterwards if you want more detail.
Oh, yes, from the delegation of Brazil.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. I would like to first thank the Secretariat for all the work that they're putting in place. We understand how difficult it is to synergize with all of the three conventions and the different delegations. And we know this touches chemicals and waste, so it is a large event in our Geneva environmental agenda. My question relates a little bit to the recent SICEM meeting that was held. Is there any expectation for any dialogue between SICEM or the new SICEM and BRS? Do we envisage that anywhere in the agenda for the COPs? And my other question relates to the program support cost waiver when it comes to travel and face-to-face participation from delegates of developing countries. We would like to know how that's going, if that's being applied or not, and if there are any actions being taken. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First question I direct it to Marilyn. Marilyn.
Thank you, Mr. Payet. Thank you for the question indeed on the relationship or cooperation and coordination between the BRS conventions and other international bodies. It is, as you know, a topic, an issue that is very keen to the parties to the BRS conventions. On the agendas of the COPs, we've always had an item on cooperation with other international bodies. And so in the upcoming COP, we're going to have, again, this agenda item, which is 5B for Basel, 6B and 6B for Rotterdam and Stockholm, and that will be on cooperation and coordination with other organizations. And so that will be really the placeholder for the cooperation between the BRS conventions and the new SICEM. So parties could take it up during that framework in plenary, and if further discussions are required, also it would be the possibility to establish a joint contact group. The SICEM Secretariat is actually going to submit an information document to the BRS COPs that will inform the discussions of the COPs on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. And then I'll ask Gundega for responding on the PSC waiver issue. Thank you.
Thank you. So this BRS Secretariat has historically submitted requests for waiver of PSC costs to UNEP for the decision of the Executive Director. However, it was clarified by the updated Delegation of Authority framework that the authority to approve any deviation from the established UN PSC policies, as well as based on Controller's Memorandum, lies with the Controller of the UN. As a result, the Secretariat's request for the waiver of the 13% PSC for COPs for last year, for June 22, as well as for the OEWG in April of 22, was not accepted. The response from the controller stated that while he recognizes the importance of the enhanced representation from developing countries for meetings, not prevent an exceptional circumstances. We did, however, submit another request for waiver for this year, seeing if there perhaps would be different outcome based on consideration this year. However, the result was pretty much the same. We submitted our request to our colleagues in UNEP for their forwarding to the controller's office. However, our colleagues were not even in a position to forward it further, since they were given clear feedback from the last attempt that such requests will be considered any further. So as of now, we did try our best to see if we get different outcome for this year's COPs and this year's meetings. However, we were not successful. So that is the status of the situation regarding the PSC.
Thank you very much, Gundega. For information, the controller office is based in New York. Thank you. Any more questions from online and the floor? No, we don't seem to have any more questions. Perhaps questions will come later. Maybe I will now hand over to Diana for the next session.
Thank you, Rolf. We have online with us Michel Chiran from Switzerland, and Michel will provide some perspectives of Switzerland on the proposal to amend articles of the Rotterdam Convention and to add also a new annex to the convention. Michel, over to you. Don't forget to unmute yourself. And after Michel speaks, we see that online we start receiving some additional questions, so we will come back to the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Diana, for introducing me. Indeed, I am Michel Chiran from the Swiss Federal Office for the Environment. And on behalf of the Swiss government, we're very happy about this event, and thank you so much for having me. It is my pleasure to present to you the proposal to amend the Rotterdam Convention. This proposal is co-sponsored by Australia, Burkina Faso, Colombia, Georgia, Ghana, Mali, Nigeria, Republic of Maldives, and Switzerland. And to begin with, I would like to play a short video developed by those co-sponsors. If the Jen could put that up. Thank you so much.
The chemicals industry is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. There are over 350,000 chemicals circulating in the global economy. The aim of the Rotterdam Convention is to share the responsibility for managing international trade in certain hazardous chemicals. It empowers importing countries to decide whether to accept chemical imports and under what conditions, and requires exporting countries to respect those decisions. The foundation of the Convention is information sharing to enable sound decision-making. The major provisions of the Convention are triggered when a chemical is listed in Annex 3. A chemical is listed in Annex 3 of the Convention when two parties from two different regions have taken action to ban or severely restrict the chemical. The Convention's Chemical Review Committee confirms that the basis for those actions meets the Convention criteria. And the COP agrees to list the chemical in Annex 3. This listing process has worked well, but unforeseen circumstances have prevented listing of some chemicals despite the majority of parties wanting to do so. This undermines the implementation of the Convention and limits the ability of parties to better control imports of hazardous substances. In May 2023, the COP will be asked to consider a proposal to amend the Convention text to create a new annex in which chemicals can be listed if agreement to list them on Annex 3 cannot be reached. How will the amendments work in practice? The amendments to the Convention text, creating the new Annex 8 and associated obligations, will only apply to those parties that ratify the amended Convention. The process for listing chemicals in Annex 3 will remain the same for all parties to the Convention. If the COP agrees to list the chemical in Annex 3, there is no need to discuss an Annex 8 listing. If the COP cannot agree to list a chemical in Annex 3, the parties to the amended Convention can decide to list the chemical in Annex 8 instead. Preferably, this decision will be taken by consensus. But if this isn't possible, it can be taken by a 3/4 majority vote. Parties to the amended Convention will be able to export any Annex 8 chemical to another party only if an import response has been transmitted. So let's recap. Looking at the COP decision process for listings, if the amendments are adopted and once they enter into force. The Chemical Review Committee recommends a chemical for listing in Annex 3. the COP agrees to list the chemical in Annex 3. All pre-existing processes and obligations for Annex 3 chemicals apply. Or the COP cannot agree to list the chemical in Annex 3. Parties to the amended convention agree by consensus or 3/4 majority to list the chemical in Annex 8. The decision and the decision guidance document are transmitted to all parties. An importing party must provide its import response before any Annex 8 chemical can be exported to them. The chemical remains on the COP agenda for a future decision on listing in Annex 3. What are the benefits of the proposed amendment? It provides an additional tool for some countries facing difficulties with managing unwanted shipments of hazardous chemicals. It will help countries to take domestic action to either manage the import of a chemical or not allow the import. It retains the aim of sharing responsibility for sound management of chemicals. It builds on existing convention processes, which will remain unchanged, including listing chemicals in Annex 3 by consensus. We hope you can support this proposal, and by doing so, support the continuing success of the Rotterdam Convention.
Thank you very much for playing the video. And if you can move forward in the slides. Yes, I'll just mention a few of the main points of the proposal. So as you have heard and as you all know, the Rotterdam Convention promotes a shared responsibility for managing trade of certain hazardous chemicals. And in particular, it is important so that countries can accept chemical import based on information provided. And the convention, of course, does not ban manufacture, use, or trade of chemicals. And you can go to the next slide. The major provisions of the conventions are, of course, triggered when a chemical is listed in Annex 3 of the convention. There is a very clear process with several steps in place. And at the end of that process, it is finally the COP who decides whether to include chemicals in Annex 3. And this is based on the assessment and recommendation of the Chemical Review Committee of the Convention. Next slide. So what is the issue that we want to address? The COP has not been able to agree to list some of the chemicals despite that assessment and recommendation from the Chemical Review Committee. Even though if the committee says that all the criteria for listing are met and recommends the chemical to be listed, then the COP has not in all cases done so, and this issue has been known for many years. When a COP cannot agree to list a chemical, that undermines the convention by eroding confidence in the process. It limits information sharing and therefore also limits the ability of parties to control imports of hazardous substances. Next slide. This is why the countries that I have mentioned before think that there is a need for a new annex, an Annex 8 to the convention. This is the proposal. That means that if the COP cannot agree to list the chemical in Annex 3, despite the recommendation of the CRC, parties to the amended convention may propose its listing in Annex 8. And for that process to be established and possible, the COP would amend at the next conference of the parties the Articles 7, 10, 11, and 22, and also establish an Annex 8. And this new annex is a means then for importing parties to benefit from the prior informed consent process and the information provided in the decision guidance document, pending consideration of a chemicals listing in Annex 3. So if the COP decides in May to adopt this proposal, the parties to the convention will have the opportunity to ratify this amendment. Next slide. How will it work? So the process for listing chemicals under Annex 3 will remain exactly the same. Nothing is changed there. However, if the COP cannot agree to list a chemical in Annex 3, then the parties to the amended convention can consider listing the chemical in Annex 8. So again, the process for listing in Annex 3 remains unchanged, and if a chemical is being listed in Annex 3, that's fine. If it is not listed in Annex 3, there is the possibility to list the chemical in Annex 8. Chemicals listed in Annex 8 will still be considered for listing in Annex 3, so they will remain before the COP for a potential future decision to include them in Annex 3. And there is no change with regard to the procedures for chemicals already listed in Annex 3. There's no change there. And there's also no change in the work of the CRC. Next slide. So the benefits of the amendment proposal are that it provides, as said in the video, an additional tool for countries that face difficulties with managing unwanted shipments of hazardous chemicals. It is therefore also an early warning system. You know, the Rotterdam Convention already has in place, but it is further extended so that it helps countries to manage hazardous chemicals, in particular, the question whether to allow the import of a chemical or not to allow this import. And the whole concept of sharing the responsibility for the sound management of chemical waste is, of course, retained, and it takes the existing convention processes and mechanism as the basis, on those remain unchanged, and it's just an additional tool for the time where a chemical is not yet listed in Annex 3. So we would invite you to support this important proposal. Next slide, please. And of course, we invite interested parties to get in touch with questions and comments. And also, if they would like to become a co-sponsor of the proposal, all material is available online on the website, and including the links to the documents and to the videos and presentations. And with that, thanks again for the opportunity to present the proposal. And of course, I'm very interested to hear any reactions or questions you may have. Thank you very much, and back to you, Diana. Dear colleagues, organizers, and colleagues in the room, sorry to interrupt. I don't know if you've seen in the chat. I don't know if you hear us. Online, we unfortunately can't hear the room. So we have not heard
Dear
the
Michelle,
question.
we will be coming back in a bit.
I think everyone can hear me, even online, right? Me, they can hear.
Yes, yes, I can hear
Yes.
you now.
Okay, perfect. So we will then come back to the.
It's working.
The sound is back online.
The sound is back online. So we go back to you. Okay. Okay. Very good.
All right, one more time. First of all, thank you very much for the proposal, Michelle, and we would like to thank the government of Switzerland and all of the other countries involved in this proposal and in bringing this discussion forward so that we can advance in the Rotterdam Convention. I have two questions regarding this proposal, and one of them was regarding the certifying agencies, the certificadoras, especially when it comes to agricultural products. So I would be interested in knowing if the proposal addresses the problem that was raised by many countries, which is the use of the PIC procedure list by the certifying agencies. And my second question is, does this proposal incorporate in any way a cooperation aspect? That is, it seems to me that our objective in international negotiations is to cooperate among each other and to come to a general objective. In this case, the sound management of chemicals, of course. Shouldn't we maybe be approaching countries who have problems with listing and offer cooperation instead of pushing them or adding another annex which might fragment the convention? So those would be my two initial observations regarding the proposal, which we are still studying. Thank you.
Michel, you can answer.
Yes, I was just going to ask you if you were going to collect more questions or if we do one by one.
Yes. So
Either is fine.
when the colleagues who were online lost the sound, we are sorry for that. We were proposing to have a round of questions specifically on what you proposed. And I will then hand over to the Executive Secretary, Half Payet, to continue with other questions that have come online regarding other points of the presentations. I'm looking in the room. I see that we have the Russian Federation. So this is specifically for what Mr. Chiren presented online. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation on the proposed amendments. Our question will be the following: from the point of view of the Secretariat and from the point of view of operational internal organization of the servicing of the Rotterdam Convention, will this lead to any changes in work? And well, how will it organized? Because you will technically have two lists. And then I would also ask and provide the question for the Swiss side in terms of the amendment itself. When we are speaking about moving an item to Annex 8, and then there was mentioned that we will be expecting it then to be moved to Annex 3 with time, if I'm not wrong. What will be the procedure for that? And how, what are we looking at in terms of, in terms of procedural thing? Who will be initiating that? How will it be organized? And what then will become of the Annex 8 with time, in case we move chemicals into it, and then we still are looking at moving the items from Annex 8 to Annex 3, so they will constantly remain on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Russian Federation. Any other questions related to the points that Michel presented? I don't see any. So Michel, I suggest you answer the two questions, and then the Executive Secretary Hofpayet will take over for the answers from the Secretariat and the other questions that have came into the chat. Michel, over to you.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor, and thank very much Helges, my colleague from Brazil, for the questions, and also the colleague from the Russian Federation for the questions. So I will go in order about the first question on the labels and certification schemes and some of the comments that were made to that respect in previous discussions. So I mean, for me, the question is not related really to the listing in Annex 3 or Annex 8. It is much more a question how the Rotterdam Convention and the effects of the convention and the effects of listing is perceived by some of the actors. As I mean, very clearly, as said also in the presentation, the listing of a chemical in Annex 3 and also perhaps later in Annex 8 is by no means restricting a trade, like preventing the manufacture and trade of chemicals. It is all about information sharing and about importing countries having the right basis for making a decision on their end about importing or not, wanting to import or not certain chemicals. So in that sense, the proposal builds on the existing convention and mechanism, and the existing Annex 3 is in that sense no different from that, and does not either, as the Annex 3 does neither, constitute a ban of manufacturing or trading anything. So this holds also true for the proposal and the annex, proposed Annex 8. How some other actors perceive the convention and work with the convention is a bit of a different discussion. Then I move to your second question on the cooperation and working with some of the parties that might have an issue about listing. The angle is very much that a big group of countries affected by imports, they should have the tools available so that they get the necessary information and can make, based on that information, decisions for them. And the proposal is very much in that vein. No, it allows to move forward in a situation where for some time this tool is not available for some of the chemicals, and therefore extends the existing tools of the convention so that in the meantime, and I'm saying in the meantime because the primary goal is still, listing using Annex 3 and listing in Annex 3, but in the meantime, the PIC instrument is also available to those countries interested and most affected through the way of moving chemicals in Annex 8 in the meantime. And of course, the amendment needs to be ratified. So those countries will ratify the amendment which think they need that tool, want to make use of that tool. So I move also now to the third question on the relation between the two annexes. And it's a similar answer than what I have just said. No, I mean, the proponents of the proposal, they want to leave the existing convention in place. They do not want to change any of the procedures or the annexes or rights or obligations of the existing provisions. But we think we can build on the existing to provide this additional tool to those interested and affected. And therefore, and if, again, if a chemical is listed in Annex 3 directly, then there's not even a discussion about moving anything to Annex 8. If the chemical is not listed in Annex 3, then the parties to the amendment have, before further consideration, the opportunity to move that chemical to Annex 8. When it's moved to Annex 8, then the rights and obligations of that annex apply to the parties. And the annex, the chemical will come at the next COP again, or each COP, with the possibility to be moved to Annex 3. When the chemical is moved to Annex 3, then the Annex 8 obligation and rights no longer exist because, as said, the Annex 3 is the heart of the Rotterdam Convention and is in the long term what everyone works with. So that is the most important, that even if at a later stage the annex, the chemical is listed in Annex 3, then we go to working with the provisions and obligations and rights of that annex for the parties of the Rotterdam Convention. And in that sense, it's also not, a split regime, but it's actually the intention of having two separate annexes was exactly to make it easier for implementation and leave the procedures and implications of Annex 3 totally unchanged by creating an additional annex where a chemical could sit, let's say, for some time pending listing in Annex 3. So I hope that is helpful in terms of the questions that were already posed, and happy to see if there are other comments or questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Concerning the first part of your question, from the Russian Federation, I invite David to provide the response. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it does create another set of responsibilities within the Secretariat, but I have to say, for using the Stockholm Convention as an example, the first 12 chemicals, all parties were bound to the first 12 chemicals. But since then, there have been more than 12 added to the convention. And for certain parties that are opt out, they are automatically added after a year unless they opt out. But then there's a group of chemical countries that aren't bound by these new chemicals, newly added chemicals, until they actually ratify. So we actually have a regime, I think it's similar to Montreal Protocol or others, where certain parties are obligated to the first 12, and then for the other 12, 13, 14 chemicals, there are some parties that are not bound by those, and we just maintain this in our database, and this information is available. In terms of this potential addition of an Annex 8, it would be only binding on those parties that have ratified that amendment. And so we would be able to maintain those who are and those are not. It would only affect those chemicals because it doesn't affect Annex 3 at all. So it's just a matter of being able to communicate the decisions or the amendments to parties, and then you get an import response. And in the case which is different is when you don't get an import response, then the trade cannot continue, but that's really an obligation on the exporting party. So we can make sure that that information is known so that countries are able to comply with the obligations associated with this new annex. But I think in general, it's not that difficult from the Secretariat standpoint to manage this flow of information. Thank you.
Michel, do you want to add something?
Thank you very much, Jana, for asking that question. I just want to, I think that was a very comprehensive response. I just want to add that for there may be, more specific questions and other comments and so on. So I just want to let everyone know that we are organizing webinars in the coming days that for the different regions. So the co-sponsors are together with the support of the Secretariat organizing these webinars so that there's a little bit more time also to dig in some of the questions and comments there may be. So there will be the presentation similar to the one that you've heard today in each of those 5 webinars. And then there's a question and answer session. And the dates for those webinars are so 9th of March. There's a webinar for the Asia Pacific region. On 9th of March is also a webinar in English proposed for the African region, and a webinar proposed in French for the Africa region. That's on 9th of March. And then on March 14th, there is a webinar for the CEE region and a webinar for the RULAC region. And so we encourage everyone who is interested to provide questions and comments to that amendment proposal to take part in one of those webinars where we'll also have time to go into more specific aspects if people are interested. So just wanted to take the opportunity to add that. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you, Michel. We will, for those who are online, we will share now the link with the information for these webinars. For who is in the room with us, all these informations are always available on the webpage of the event, and we will share again the link later. With that, Ralph Payet, over to you.
Thank you very much, Diana. So just taking care of one question we had from the chat, and this was from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and that was on the relationship between BRS and work we're doing with the Montreal Protocol Secretariat on the Montreal Protocol. I just want to say that we've already started discussions with the Montreal Protocol Secretariat, and we already finalized the terms of reference for the development of a joint publication on the interrelations between the Montreal Protocol and the BRS conventions. And that will hopefully highlight some of the interactions and also relations between the two conventions. And we're hoping, if we can get the work done, this publication will be launched by our COP at the COPs and also by colleagues in Nairobi for the Montreal Protocol. At the last MOP of the Montreal Protocol, they also decided to organize a joint one-day meeting ahead of or before the OEWG of the Montreal Protocol. So we're in the phases of planning a joint session with them before the open-ended working group of the Montreal Protocol, not of the Basel Convention. I'm just making the difference here. I think it will be held in Bangkok, that meeting, but don't quote me on this. And also there's ongoing meetings now between BRS, Montreal Protocol, and also the Multilateral Fund, as they also decided on a decision of the executive board of the Multilateral Fund, also decided on a decision related to inventories and so on. And of course, things are evolving now, and we'll provide more information once we have those informations. Thank you very much. Yes, we have a question from ILO as well. What is the deadline for submitting INF documents? This I would hand over to Marilyn, who's handling all this. Thank you, Marilyn. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Payet. So I understand that the representative of ILO is interested in perhaps sharing information with the COPs on their activities that are relevant to the conventions. So that would be, for example, under the agenda items on international cooperation. At this point in time, it's a bit delicate, let's say, to submit new information documents in the process because we are closing. I mean, we are now releasing all our documents to the COPs. So maybe I would advise the representative of the ILO to make a statement in the plenary during the meetings, or to submit maybe information document during the meetings. We would make available this document on the intranet of the meetings for information of all the participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. I don't see any further questions from the room, no virtually. So thank you all. Thank you, Excellencies, participants. Thank you very much for participating in this morning sessions. I know maybe further questions might come up. Please reach out to the Secretariat. We are all available to answer your questions or clarify certain issues. So please do not hesitate to get back to us before the COPs on any further questions and queries you may have. And of course, we'll be very happy to support you in that process. And now like to invite Michel, who is also representing the Swiss host, to give his closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rolf, for giving me the floor. And many thanks again on behalf of the Swiss government for organizing this event. So many thanks to the Geneva Environment Network, and also many thanks to the BRS Secretariat. It is really amazing, no, that you can have in a short time of an hour or two this wealth of information about what is coming up, what people have to prepare for. So I think it's very, very useful. I also liked very much that we indicated the importance of the upcoming BRS COPs for other processes. It was very clear the relevance of the BRS COPs with regard to environmental issues beyond, the Geneva-based chemical waste cluster. And in that sense, I want to echo, for example, what David Ogden has said about items that are on the agenda. There is, for example, the plastic waste guidelines, for example, coming up at the BRS COPs that has a strong link, of course, to the work of the INC on plastics. Of course, the listing of UV 328 in the Stockholm Convention will be a very important decision at the upcoming COPs, and has also an important link to the plastics. It was also said about the upcoming agenda items of the COP relating to international cooperation and coordination, that is with the INC, with the Science Policy Panel, but also the work within the cluster, with the Minamata Convention and other actors. So these really are key decisions that we should take up the upcoming COP. It's also to underline that the listing of new chemicals in the Rotterdam and Stockholm Convention is always a high priority, because that's how we further develop the conventions and make sure that they have their impact with regard to the sound management of chemicals and waste. And in that context, also, of course, the amendments of conventions are very much important. We heard also in this briefing that there was the e-waste amendment of the Basel Convention, putting all e-waste on Annex 2. And of course, now it is a very important follow-up that the e-waste guideline can reflect the amendment that we adopted at the last BRS COP. And so looking forward to May, that it will also be a feasible and important step to take, that we can incorporate the amendment on e-waste into the e-waste guideline. It was also, of course, very useful, and thank you for that as well, that you have provided the colleagues, provided information on the budget that will be negotiated, presented the budget scenarios and the wealth of information. And this is always very well prepared and much appreciated by the parties. And this time also the information that was provided with regard to the program support cost policy and potential changes. So that was also good that people can have the information up front. And of course, after all of this, I want to come back before I close to say that for the Rotterdam Convention, it is really a crucial point in time, the upcoming BRS COPs. There were two intersessional processes with regard to the effectiveness of the Rotterdam Convention that were conducted, that yielded a limited set of actions that were considered to improve that. But the actual core issue with regard to the effectiveness of the convention, that is the listing of chemicals that were recommended by the CRC to be listed, and then the COP does not follow through. That core issue has not been addressed, and therefore the co-sponsors of the Rotterdam Amendment proposal think that with their proposal there can finally be a solution to that difficult situation, where the threat exists that this becomes more and more difficult over the years if there is not finally now a step taken to address it. And in that sense, it's a very good opportunity for the cluster as a whole to strengthen the Rotterdam Convention and therefore ensure its effectiveness and give the possibility to all interested parties, and in particular the most vulnerable, that they have the tools available to make sound decisions about imports. And therefore, of course, all actors taking place in this meeting today, but also participating in the upcoming COPs, are very much welcome to discuss that amendment proposal, make use of the webinars, and come prepared to the COPs so that a good solution can be found and that amendment proposal can be adopted. So with that, thanks again very much to everyone involved in today's briefing. And I wish you good preparation for the very full COP agenda in the remaining time ahead, and looking forward to seeing many of you in Geneva for the BRS COPs. Thank you very much. Thanks to the BRS Secretariat and thanks to the Gen, and wishing everyone a very good rest of the day.
Thanks. We send you 1 more minute and I will send you.
Which Twitter handle are you posting? Because I was looking at the Rotterdam.
No, it's on the Geneva Environment Network.
Geneva Environment Network.
Oui, oui, ils sont pas sensibles. Alors que les gens étaient même à l'OMS.